Good morning. So we're continuing our Easter journey, learning to know Jesus in a new way. On the first Sunday, we learned to know Jesus in absence, in the empty tomb. And then the next Sunday, we learned to know Jesus in the breaking of the bread. And then last week, we knew Jesus in doubt. And Thomas could put his fingers in Jesus' hands. Now, the disciples went north to Galilee, just as Jesus had told them. It was a long journey, some 80 miles. It took about 4 days to walk. Now, many of them were fishermen, and so they went to the Sea of Galilee to rest. It was the place that they knew as boys. They had fished there with their fathers. And suddenly, Peter stood up and said, "I'm going fishing." And the rest went with him to prepare the boat. And soon, they pushed out. Into the sea, and the sail filled with wind. And they fished all night. But they caught nothing. Still, the sounds and smells of the lake comforted them. They were home. In the morning, the sky turned pink and then blue, and they could make out someone standing by a fire on the shore. They could see the smoke and the red glow from the embers. "Have you caught anything?" All they could say was no. "Throw your nets on the other side." What could they lose? And they pulled up the empty nets and threw them over the other side. They could feel the fish, even as they held the ropes. John was not paying attention to the fish. He leaned forward and watched the man moving on the shore. He said to Peter, "It is the Lord." Now Peter stood up, and he jumped, he swam, he felt the sand under his feet, and he waded to shore. The others turned the boat toward land. The nets were so full that they couldn't pull them in, so they dragged them behind the boat. And as they walked toward the fire, the stranger called out, "Bring some fish." And when they gathered around the fire, the stranger was no stranger. They all knew it was Jesus, but were too afraid to say anything. "Have some breakfast." There were fish cooking on the fire, and he gave them fish and bread. And they talked as they ate, and the fish and bread tasted of home. And then Jesus said to Peter, "Do you love me?" "Yes, of course." "Feed my lambs." "Do you love me?" "Yes." "Tend my sheep." "Do you love me?" "You already know I do." "Feed my sheep." And then he began to talk to Peter about growing old and how you need help in old age. Sometimes people tell you what to do even if you don't want them to. Years later, they wondered if Jesus had been preparing Peter for his death in Rome as an old man. And Jesus said, "Follow me." Did he mean all of them? No. Peter got up and the two of them walked along the shoreline, and Peter looked back and saw John following them. What about this man? Will he die like the rest of us? It is not for you to know such things. And Peter fell silent, and Jesus was gone. Now I wonder, is there anything that you can bring to put beside these pictures to help us tell more of this story? Is there something that seems to you like it just needs to be there? Look around and see. Last week we had a story about pashanka eggs. Maybe we could bring those. Maybe we should bring the plate and the cup because Jesus ate fish with them. What do you think? Known in doubt, known in the breaking of the bread, known in absence. And you will be fishers of men. So for today's story, I'm going to read Three Bears in a Boat by David Soman. Once there were three bears, Dash, Charlie, and Theo, who lived by the sea. One day, when their mother was out, the three bears did something they really shouldn't have and crashed their mother's beautiful blue seashell came, lay scattered in pieces across the floor. Afraid of their mama, who after all was a bear, the three fled from their house down to the beach and huddled behind their boat. Theo whispered nervously, "What should we do?" Charlie just crossed her arms and stared out at the sea. It was Dash, as usual, who had an idea. What if we find another blue seashell and put it back before Mama gets home? She'll never even know that anything happened. Charlie and Theo smiled. And just like that, the sly bears slid into their boat and into the sea and set sail. Their sail flew open like a wing, and the boat flashed across the water. Dotting the sea around their home were many other bears in boats. Surely one of them would know where to find a blue seashell. But the bears in the first boat didn't know where to look. And the bears in the second boat were a little bit confused. The bears in the third boat seemed a bit busy. And then they met a big salty bear and asked him if he knew where any blue seashells might be. And the salty bear looked up at them and down with his keen old sailor eyes. "I reckon I might," he said. "A ways over yonder," he told them, "is an island shaped like a lumpy hat. And on that island there might be a seashell, a beautiful blue one. It could be underwater, or in the tallest tree, or at the very top of the mountain. It might even be hidden in a cave. I'm not dead certain, but if you look in the right place, I reckon you'll find it." And as he began to motor away, the three little bears yelled their thanks to him. "Just look in the right place," he said, with a wave of his big old paw. Just look in the right place. Excited, they were sure that they would have a new shell for their mother, and the three bears sailed on. They sailed past islands that looked like a lot of fun, and past some that maybe didn't. Their voyage was not without incident. They sailed farther than they had ever sailed before. They sailed until an island rose in a lump before them and began to search for a seashell. And as you will recall, it could be underwater. But it wasn't. It wasn't in the trees. It wasn't on the mountaintop. And then they found a small cave. "I'm not going in there," Theo said. "It's dark." "But this has to be the right place," said Dash, peering in. "We've looked everywhere else." And then Charlie walked inside. "A bear is afraid of a cave," she snorted, and the other two followed. Inside, the cave was small and dark, and there was definitely no blue seashell. The three were most unhappy and stared at each other with very squinty, very mad bear eyes all the way back to their boat. They had no blue seashell, and they felt very far from home. Back on the boat, the bears began to argue. And Dash said to Theo, "We're all stuck out here because you broke the seashell." And Theo yelled, "It's Charlie's fault because she was too wobbly." And Charlie growled, "No, I wasn't. And it was Dash's idea to sneak the honey in the first place." And round they went, getting madder and madder and louder and louder and yelling and pointing paws at each other. And they didn't even notice how the sky had been turning darker and darker and how the sea had turned rougher and rougher until, boom! Dash, Charlie, and Theo were scared. They didn't care whose fault it was anymore. They were all in the same boat. Wet and blinking, the three bears looked at each other, and Dash said, "It was my really bad idea." And Theo said, "It was an accident, but I did knock the shell over." And Charlie said, "Well, I guess I was sort of wobbly." And they reached out their paws and clung to each other very tightly. And then like turning a page. The little boat sailed out of the storm and into the sun, and the three bears floated on water as smooth and as calm as glass, and the storm already seemed far away. And there, straight ahead, was their very own island, and the bears set sail for home, and they knew what they had to do. They pulled up the boat on their own shore, and at the edge of the beach sat a beautiful blue seashell. Picking up the seashell, Dash said, remembering the words of the old salty bear, "This was the right place," he said, looking at his brothers and sisters. And then the three bears walked up the long dune to their house. Mama was waiting for them. "I'm sorry I broke your shell," Theo said. "Me too," said Dash. "Me three," said Charlie. "But look what we found for you." And Dash held up the beautiful new shell. And Mama Bear, being a mother, looked at each one of her three little bears and hugged them all very, very tight and kissed the tops of their furry heads and forgave them. And then she brought them inside for a warm supper. But they didn't get dessert. I hope you like that story. And I have a prayer to close us with. Let nothing disturb you. Let nothing upset you. Everything changes. God alone is unchanging. With patience, all things are possible. Whoever has God lacks nothing. God alone is enough. Well, I hope you have a good week, and we'll see you again next week for the next way we know Jesus in a new way.